Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition or mini-series of Catholic Saints. We are talking about kind of the most fundamental matter when we're talking about Catholic saints. What makes a saint? And then we're also going to talk about the angels. So we're going to be talking about some things in this episode that are certainly standalone, need no assistance from other episodes, and then this will also be part of a series. So today I am with Dr. Elizabeth Klein. Dr. Klein, it's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
It is a joy to have you. Dr. Klein, you are a professor of theology here at the Augustine Institute. Do you have any classes that you're teaching at the moment?
I am teaching history in the ancient and medieval world and mystagogy, also known as the sacraments.
Also known as the sacraments. That's very exciting. If anyone out there has ever been curious about our Graduate School of Theology, which we have here, which Dr. Klein is a faculty member of, you can just Google the Augustine Institute Graduate School of Theology. They have sample lectures. Go check it out. I went through the school. It is wonderful. I had Dr. Klein as a teacher. So it is a joy to talk to you again on Formed for Catholic Saints.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I mean, this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I wrote my dissertation on the angels, angels in the thought of St. Augustine. And I recently wrote a book on saints and angels that'll be coming out November the 10th.
You did. So you may be watching or listening to this episode before the book comes out or after. Either way, there is a link in the description for this episode where you can pre-order the book if you happen to be listening before it is released. And I'm sure that page will be updated to just simply buy the book once it is released. So if you are interested in this topic, check it out. What's the title again?
It's called Saints and Angels, Who They Are and Why They Matter, published by Ave Maria Press.
All right. Very good. So check that out. Okay. So Dr. Klein, as I was thinking about the first part of this episode, which is what makes a saint, I think my first thought was actually we use saint in kind of a lot of different contexts. Obviously, as Catholics, we have Saint Peter, Saint Pius, whatever. But then you hear people talking about like, oh, well, he's a saint. He's a living saint. And
right.
So there's a couple different applications. But what does the word saint mean? Where does it come from?
Right. So I think that the word saint in kind of modern Catholic usage has kind of become almost like a technical term. But it just comes from the Latin word sanctus, which means holy, as in, sanctus, sanctus, sanctus. Mm-hmm. So in early usages of the word, they're not using it as a technical designation, in early church or whatever. They're just describing someone as holy.
And do you mean early church as in biblical, like early church, or do you mean like early church after Acts of the Apostles kind of?
I mean, in both cases, right? Because Paul will use saint in the most general possible way in the New Testament, just to refer to all believers at a church, the saints at a certain church. Okay. To all the saints at Philippi, to all the saints, and at Ephesus. And so in the earliest period of the church, when there is a holy person, especially someone who has passed away, but even someone who's living, they'll describe them as, the Holy Father Benedict, the Holy Father Augustine. And that's the word sanctus, from which we get saint. So it isn't kind of a technical term like we would like ST, capital ST period. It's just a general word for holiness. So to understand the kind of whole breadth of the use of the word saint, we have to ask kind of what does it mean to be holy? What is holiness?
That's right, yeah.
And this is actually a kind of difficult question. It's a harder question than it seems at first because we call lots of things holy, right? We talk about the Holy Bible, and we talk about people as being holy, and we talk about God as being holy, which seems like kind of like different things. Like how can a Bible be holy and God is also holy in a person? And so really holiness ultimately is a kind of category pertaining to like participation in God's life. So God is absolutely holy because he is sort of utterly apart from all things, is perfectly glorious, and all other things are holy, like up to the extent that they participate in God's life. So that's why we can say like things we use at Mass or whatever are holy because though they're inanimate objects, so they're not like holy because they have a virtuous life or something, but they've been consecrated for worship of God. So, a chalice used at Mass is like the holiest you can get for an inanimate object because it's participating in the worship of God. And so for a human being to participate in the worship of God, obviously means things like going to church, participating in the sacraments, but ultimately means living your life so as to be a living sacrifice to God. So that's why holiness for a human being is a lot more complex because it involves, the extent to which our lives
And
reflect
not just
God and participate
use
in God.
in a ceremony per se, like an
Right.
object. Yeah.
Right. And so kind of all those things are holy. And so all of those things are saintly in a certain respect. And so this is why you can have Paul calling everyone at Ephesus a saint, and even everyone at Corinth a saint. And if you've read the letters to the Corinthians, you will know that the Corinthians are not a very good group of Christians.
not.
They're not Paul's best, I don't know.
They had a complicated relationship.
Yeah, they have a
to say the
complicated
least.
relationship with Paul. There's a lot of
Yeah.
sketchy happenings at the church in Corinth. But what Paul is talking about, he's talking about them being saints, it's hagios in Greek, being holy. He's talking about them being set aside for the worship of God in a particular way. And so the kind of most basic category of holiness for a human being is being baptized.
Okay.
Because as Catholics, we believe that when you're baptized, you receive a kind of indelible character on your soul. And that character means you're kind of like deputed to the worship of God. Mm-hmm. You're like, you have a kind of objective call to worship God. So whether or not you actually fulfill that call, you are kind of set apart and holy by your baptism. So you could think of like sainthood as kind of concentric circles. It's like the biggest group of saints are anyone who's baptized in kind of like the broadest sense. Then you could think of a smaller circle of people who are getting more saintly are people who are sort of persisting in a state of grace, people who are practicing their faith, living their life so as to avoid mortal sin, these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then you could think of another people who are holier than that are people who are already in glory. So those are people who have already died in the grace of Christ and are seeing God face to face now. So those are all saints. And then canonized saints are like a smaller circle within those in glory. So there are lots of people in glory that the church has not proclaimed to be saints in the technical sense, that we don't incorporate into our public worship. But that smaller category is, even that category is also about worship. Because what it ultimately means to be canonized, it means that it's like you can be part of the worship of the church, right? You can be named in the liturgy, you can have your intercession requested, and these kinds of things. So all these categories have to do with like your participation in the worship of God. All baptized participate to some degree, but those who participate most especially are those who are like incorporated into the mass on earth. But they're not necessarily better than the rest. Unknown saints in glory, those are also saints.
Yeah, but it's an important distinction because I think when we think of holiness, well, there's two things. So when we think of saints, as you're saying, it's good to know that there's been this kind of development of the idea of sainthood, because I think you're right. Most people today probably think of ST period X name as a technical term, whereas Paul is using it more in accord with what you're saying holiness is, which is a category of being set apart. And then in relation to holiness, I feel like probably there's an undercurrent of thought of like where holiness is you're doing a ton of good deeds and you're working really hard, which is connected to holiness, certainly, but that at its most fundamental level, it's being set apart for worship. I just don't think most people would probably articulate it
right,
that
because
way.
the saints in glory aren't really like busy doing good deeds, right?
They're filled with charity.
Yeah, they're filled with charity and they're worshiping God, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what they're doing. That's like the ultimate sort of goal of human life. Is just how to worship God in this valley of tears is a complicated matter, and how to sort of transform your life into the perfect sacrifice to God is no easy affair. It involves a lot of liturgy, but also prayer and also grace and also habits and all kinds of other things that go along with being sort of a imperfect person in time and space.
Yeah, but I love that if anyone that is out there, if you're watching this video or if you're on forum, you are probably to some extent concerned about growing in holiness. All of us are. And that it's a great way to think about it. How do I grow in holiness? How can I more actively make my life a living sacrifice to God? How can I more actively participate in the liturgy, as the Second Vatican Council asked us to? How can I make my work life, my family life, a participation of worship of God and bringing that in different ways? So it's a really cool way to
I think
think about it.
we talk about like sanctifying all areas of life, and it's just what you're saying. I mean, it matters to God whether or not we're diligent in our work and offer it as a sacrifice. And every aspect of life, our sufferings, our trials, these can all be means of sanctification. And sometimes we think about that as, at least I do, like they say marriage is a means of sanctification, and you're like, I don't know, I seem to yell a lot at my children. Like, it doesn't seem like I'm like getting holier. But it is at least in part about that suffering being an act of worship and having everything kind of ordered to the proper end. Maybe it's not always as visible as we would like.
I know sometimes whenever that happens, and you do something, you yell at your kids, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. Then you back up and you're like, at least, Lord, you're revealing my weaknesses. Appreciate that. I know
yes.
you're about my good.
Making you more humble.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Okay, so we have a better understanding of how saint has been used in the early church, how it's a more technical meaning today, that it is rooted in holiness, which is a being a called out of, a consecrated, a separation for worship. And so when we now look at today in that more technical definition, we get to something called the canonization process, or we say when St. Peter is a canonized saint. What does that mean?
Right. So canonized, again, I think nowadays we're used to thinking of canonized as meaning they've gone through the process of canonization, which we'll have another episode on because I can't do the whole process in just this one. But again, in the early church, being a canonized saint simply meant that you were incorporated licitly, that you were appropriately incorporated into the worship of the church. So when we think about the Roman canon, that list of names that's prayed in Eucharistic Prayer 1, that's the names of saints who were incorporated into the Eucharistic prayer. So the word canon, like when you think of the canon of Scripture, right, those are like a church-approved list of books that are in our Bible. That's the same as the canon of the saints. It's like the church-approved list of saints that's in our worship. So in the earliest period, there's no process, right? It's just like...
Which was the same for the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little different, but,
yeah.
As you were saying that, it's interesting. If some of you out there haven't ever really dove into how did the Bible come to be, the answer is a complex kind of moving through exactly what Dr. Klein is saying, which is these books got integrated into the liturgy of the church.
Yeah, and St. Augustine says, like, what's in the canon of Scripture? He's like, whatever the church uses.
Exactly.
And he's like, if there's a dispute,
got integrated into worship.
And he's like, well, if there's a dispute, it's what most of the church uses.
Yeah, but it's a really interesting kind of, that's where you realize the working of the Holy Spirit within and through the church. It's not quite as black and white always as we would like. And it's a very mysterious thing, but it's books. Some of Paul's letters started getting read in church and others didn't. But it's similar that these names, these saints, all of a sudden are showing up in the liturgical prayers. Yeah,
and something that makes it a little bit more black and white, I suppose, about the sanctity of life of the earliest saints in the canon is that they're martyrs.
Yeah, that makes it easy.
So if you died for the faith... It's actually true all the way till today that martyrs have a easier time getting canonized than other kinds of saints. And even if you go into the sort of next period in the 4th century after persecution, it's a lot of ascetics who are considered to have a kind of like white martyrdom or whatever, like they died to themselves and died to the world. And so that's a kind of like very clear sort of early standard. But yeah, to become canonized is to be incorporated into the worship of the church. So if people considered you lived a holy life and are representing you as such and asking your intercession, this is the process of entering the canon. So that's as I said, basically canonized means you're part of the like approved list for worship in the church, which of course now has a much more official process, which we'll talk about in another episode, why we have that process, where it came from, and all that.
So consider this a teaser for episode 2.
More on canonization to come.
Yeah, that's right. But it is absolutely fascinating. So, okay, I'll pause there before we move into the realm of angels. Is there anything else you wanted to add for saints or canonization?
No, I think that's good.
Alrighty. As promised, so we talked about what makes a saint. But it's interesting because we talk about angels, and obviously we all know that angels are different than humans, but we call both people and angels saints.
Right.
So what's an angel?
Yeah. So this was interesting because as I was prepping this episode, we were thinking about doing what is a saint and what is an angel. And also, well, technically angels are saints. Yeah. We probably include them together. So the basic definition of an angel, the word angel, means messenger. So it's from the Greek, like to announce, angelo. And so we're not used to thinking about it like this, but angel is not actually the name of the nature of, it's not like human. It's not like the name of the essence.
Yeah.
They could call them celestial spirits. It's the name of their job.
Yeah.
So angel means to announce or to be a herald. And so we, of course, see angels doing this all over the Old Testament. In terms of their nature, we speak of angels as rational, incorporeal beings.
You got to remember that. Rational, incorporeal beings.
So
what does that mean?
So we are human beings. We are rational, corporeal beings, which means we have an intellect, but we have bodies. Angels are like us in that they are rational, they have reason, but they don't have any bodies.
Okay.
So if we think about sort of God's grand design and creation, right? God manifests like sort of every form of perfection that there is. So he creates beings that are reasonable and don't have bodies, beings that are reasonable and do have bodies, and beings that are not reasonable and have bodies, which is like animals. And so there's kind of like every level. So angels are capable of being saints just like human beings because they have reason and intellect and will, and they can participate in the worship of God by their free consent. And angels that's like what they do all the time. So the couple times we sort of get to see what angels are doing at home, in like the book of Revelation or in Isaiah, what they're doing is worshiping God.
Can I ask, so for human beings, we talk about being a saint, you are set apart, and then ultimately with the goal of being united with Christ in heaven and participating. And then we come to angels, and they don't follow that track because they don't live a human life of development. And so there is a way in which they just are that. They're just participating in the worship of God. Are there angels that are not in heaven?
Yeah, well, all the fallen angels.
But that's important because we call them demons, but they're angels.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so the fallen angels, the devil, and those who chose against God are not saints. They are demons.
Not all angels.
Not all
saints.
angels are saints. So yeah, we think about the particular aspect of human sanctity is that we make choices over time for and against God, and we see these kind of like beautiful stories of the saints, right? That's a particular human characteristic of sainthood. But there's another perfection, which is angelic sainthood, which was a once for all decision, either for or against God. So
angels
angels
still involved the will, just not in a
right.
way in which human beings do that over a multitude of decisions in time.
Right, because angels don't have bodies. And so they don't change over time in the same way that we do. They make a once for all decision. So if you ever wondered, like, why does God make it so hard? Why do we have to do it like over time and have this like long life? It's like, well, he did. It's called angels. And you're like, why does God make it so we just can't choose evil? It's like, he did. It's called animals. So he did all those things. It's just that we kind of inhabit a particular place in this hierarchy. So we do have a particular nature of our sanctity. So like, especially saint stories, which I love because I come on and talk about them.
Right.
This is a particularly human thing. Angels don't really have like a saint story. They made a decision at the beginning of their creation for or against God, and they participate in God's plan of salvation, but they don't, there's no like, angel biographies.
But that is like the drama of even, all of the beings that God has created that have an intellect and a will. The drama of our life is, what do we choose? And for angels, that happens in a very mysterious way, instantaneously. And for us humans, that is the drama of our entire life. Will we side with grace, or will we choose ourselves? So it's a fascinating drama.
All right. I think that covers the definition of saint and angel.
You're feeling good there. I feel good there. We hope you do too. Alrighty, so that is what makes a saint and what is an angel. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about the canonization process a little bit more in depth. Dr. Klein will walk us through what it means, how it's developed, a little bit there. We're going to talk about relics. Always a fascinating topic. And then archangels and guardian angels. So stay tuned. Dr. Klein, thank you for joining me.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next time. God bless.